All right. So we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Grace Ames. I'm the Communications and Membership Manager with Missouri Organic Association. Missouri Organic Association is a 501(c)(3) nonprofit that works throughout Missouri and neighboring states to provide extension education, outreach, and occasional funding for producers. We work with producers of all kinds and all sizes, everywhere from the quarter acre to 1 acre market garden, all the way up to large acre row crop, livestock. So we're touching every possible piece of agriculture that we can here in the Midwest. We are a member-based organization. And so our membership kind of continues to help support those efforts to educate people. While organic is in our name, we don't specifically work in the organic field. We do talk a lot about organic. We host open office hours every Wednesday that are very focused on kind of getting people into whether or not certification is right for them and how to go about that process. But we also open those open office hours for everyone who has questions. Um, and then we are in the midst of our strategic planning. And so you can anticipate seeing from us by the end of the year a little more growth in scope of both what we offer and geographically where we offer that. The Farmgate Journal is our kind of series of media. We do webinars, we do podcasts, and eventually we'll expand on our offerings through the Farmgate Journal. But today we are joined by Caleb Howerton. So Caleb and I go back a good decade-ish. We used to both live in Southwest Missouri. I watched him farm and host farm-to-table dinners at his farm. And eventually, I had the opportunity when I moved to the Kansas City area to hire him. And it just so happened that he was at the point of moving out of owning his own farm at exactly the same time I needed a farm manager. And I got to work pretty closely with him, hand in hand, and see his excitement around regenerative agriculture and see his take on it. And I think it's a really special and unique take. So today, he is going to be talking with us about kind of the key performance indicators for regenerative grazing, what we should be looking for, and we'll go from there. So Caleb, thanks for joining us. Anything you would like to say about yourself before we get started?
Yeah, just that I've had, as most young farmers, right, when we get into farming, I feel like I watch a lot of small farms start with everything, right? And then you kind of figure out what you're good at. Um, I did that for probably way longer than I should have, which meant that I now have a lot of experience with most different types of farming and agriculture, everything from raising large quantities of rabbits to bison to row cropping to orchards and dairy management. So realistically, that's where a lot of my thought process on ag comes from, is seeing how all of these disparate aspects of agriculture kind of blend and mesh together. And I've always been an outdoorsy person, right? Love hunting and fishing and hiking, and that kind of then ties into I still want to be able to do all of that, right? And still enjoy those things, and knowing that we are one of the largest uses of land, we should tie those together. So that's a thread you'll see a lot through this entire conversation, I hope. So
Perfect. Thank you. And then general housekeeping rules for everyone. This is interview conversation style. If you have questions at any point, please drop them in the chat and I will be watching the chat so we can ask Caleb those questions. And then towards the end of the hour or the end of our time together, we will open this up for you guys to unmute yourselves and ask questions if I know a lot of times it's hard to get a point across via text. So, or maybe you're driving and listening to this, whatever that looks like, we will open it up so that you can take yourself off mute if you have those questions, because this is for you. You guys are the farmers, you're the producers, and we want you to be able to have opportunity to have the conversation and get everything answered that you want. All right. So, Caleb, when we started, I had you send over a description and a bio, and you've said in that there are 1,001 different ways to manage grazing, and many of them can work. Why is it important that producers focus less on following a specific grazing method and more on measuring the outcomes of their system?
Honestly, because not all, and I'd argue none of the like mainstream systems I see people work with in grazing methods work in every single context, right? I mean, you have a dry year, you have an excessively wet year, you have people growing in more desert climes that's going to drastically shift, and people growing in even just in Missouri, right? We've got our southeast boot heel versus northern Missouri. Those are two drastically different spaces. So if you get stuck in that one mentality of this is how I graze, right, then you're not going to have that flexibility you need to adapt year to year and within that year and within a specific paddock that's different from one paddock to the other. So we need to be able to be willing to shift gears and look at all of these different grazing systems and adapt what we need to do differently at a given time of year and in a given paddock.
I think you said
And I
something
think
really,
looking at the,
go ahead.
good.
I was going to say, I think you said
I was just
something
going to say that I,
really important with the weather piece of things. Um, we might have a plan that works for us this year, and then the weather changes. I know in Missouri this year is a lot wetter than last year was, or it's continuing to be wet longer than it was last year. That really affects grazing. So I think that's a great point, that weather piece.
yeah, and it you could be worried with that being like one of our last years that we had our farm in Missouri. We had a horrible, I forget what year it was now, honestly, but we'd had a horribly wet year. It was the worst or like the most rain we had got. I don't want to call it worst because it worked out great for starting a bunch of willows for us and starting some of the trees, but we had the most rain we'd ever had up until end of April, beginning of like May. And then from that point on, the worst drought that we had had on record. We'd had like 8 weeks of no rain in southern Missouri. Like, but we had both of those. Everything flooded out and was underwater, and then everything was bone dry. And so being able to change and adapt is really, really important in that.
It's fantastic. So before we talk about specific indicators, what does a healthy, thriving grazing system actually look like? What outcomes should producers be working towards?
Honestly, it should look pretty chaotic and loud, right? If it looks chaotic to most people, like I growing up in southern Missouri most of my life, you go out to a lot of fields and paddocks, and it just looks like fescue, right? Just lots and lots of mowed down fescue, and that's it. A nice, diverse, thriving landscape is going to have tons of different plants. It's going to look more like, a picturesque wildflower meadow where you're going to have giant ragweed growing everywhere and common ragweed and milkweed and all of these things that we might not necessarily want if we were just thinking from a single fescue. And it's going to be loud. There are going to be so many birds, so many insects. You should have tons of different livestock species out there grazing together and separate and moving through this mosaic structure, right? That like those cows are making noise, chickens are making noise, the sheep are going off, and pigs, right? So it should be excessively loud from
So
the
when you,
standpoint of just a field of cows.
okay, so when you say loud, we're talking about diversity, not only of plant matter, but of animals as well. Or what if somebody
Mm-hmm.
just has beef cattle? Should they be adding more, or maybe they don't want to? What are we looking at?
Mm-hmm. So I think you should add more, right? You shouldn't just have a field of cows, inevitably. One, because like that's expensive. You have all of this infrastructure for one species, right? And instead, say you have kids that are wanting to get on the farm and start beginning to kind of take some of that over, bring them back in and run a poultry operation in tandem with your beef operation. Let that be their thing. That will now work in and help. You don't have to do what, a lot of us seem to do when we start farms and try to do everything ourselves. We work together with that family that we want to get on the farm and one day take over the farm from us by bringing them in and working on some separate enterprises. But I literally mean when I say loud, like loud. There should be so much birdsong. We've done videos for our old YouTube where I had to actually turn down the background noise because bird calls were so loud and insect calls were so loud you couldn't hear me talking, even with a little microphone. Like it was just so loud. And
That's
that's
amazing.
what it should be.
A cacophony of nature. I love that.
Yep.
Okay, so let's do a scenario. Imagine you walk onto a farm for the first time. You have 30 minutes. You have no soil tests, no records, no history of the operation. You're just blank going into a farm. What are the first five things that you would look at to understand whether the grazing system is working?
So usually when I first walk into one like this, and I actually we'll jump ahead on what I would normally think and what I've talked about on this all kind of came from a long Instagram stories thread thing I made. And I put birds quite a ways down on there, but realistically, when I first walk onto a farm and I'm trying to do that, I there's an app called Merlin, and it will record bird song. And first thing when you walk into your field, if you're trying to evaluate this, like I would be doing, I just turn that app on and just throw it in my back pocket and just let it start recording, and we'll come back to that. But first thing, if I'm starting that 30-minute timer, I'm going to click and turn that on so it's listening while we're going. But what I would do is I'd walk out into your field. First thing, we'd get a few feet out, and I'm going to stop. I'm going to go 10, 15-foot radius around me and start grabbing leaves from as many different plant species as I can because I want to see how many species are around me. I want to find easily 20 plus different species of grasses and forbs and weeds, right? Just right here within 10, 15 feet around me. And I should be able to do that anywhere in the field. I shouldn't hit one spot where I'm like, this is just one species. Whether it's a dry glady area or a wetlandy area, I should be able to still find 20 plus species of forage that my livestock can go through and eat and enjoy, and then all the bugs and birds can eat and enjoy too and be part of that system. Next, I'd start figuring out like where are our livestock? We're going to go find them, and especially where they just were a day or two ago. And I'm going to start looking through dung paths. And I have done this a lot of times where people start getting very confused on tours because we're like, the livestock are over there and you're over here playing in poop, right? Like, but we want to grab those dung paths. And Grace is loud because she's seen this many times. And I'll go out there with a little cup from ones on previous tours. We've found a few others to show people. Dung beetles are one of the easiest ways to determine, like, are we getting our parasite management right? Are we getting our soil structure right? Because they need to burrow in and among that soil. So I want to be able to find 4 to 8 species on just an average farm. If I can't find 4 to 8 species just kind of right off the bat, I know we've got a problem, right? And I want to find those dung paths from a few days ago should be mostly destroyed. Like they will just be shredded apart or they will be filled with Swiss cheese like holes when you break them open. So right, I'm gonna immediately start looking at dung paths to try to find those,
I'm going to
and then
interrupt
insects
you
in
for
general, just
just
while we're walking.
a
Yeah.
moment. Since you're talking about dung beetles, Caleb sent this to me in planning for this. So this is what you're talking about with the Swiss cheese style, correct?
Yep. Yes. So a lot of those in that picture right there are just dwellers. Those aren't even some of the more crazy things. We'll get like tunneler dung beetles that are gonna, which is a lot of what you'll find are tunnelers. At least in my experience, I don't find near as many rollers. I find a lot of dwellers and a lot of tunnelers. And you can see in this picture here what a lot of those dwellers have done is made all these little holes that Swiss cheese through there, and they're taking and eating pieces of that. They're bringing in phoretic mites that are eating flies. They're removing food for flies, like horn flies, that are going to be a problem for your cattle and for your sheep. Um, so I want to see this like right off the bat. This is a very easy thing. We did this particular farm right here that this came from. Deworming had been happening pretty consistently and throughout the year. And yet we got back to this from when I stepped on it, I found one dung beetle species. We got to this in less than a year. So it is very easily doable if you just slowly begin switching over and adjusting your practices on this. Um, on to pop myself back over to that question there. Third thing I'm going to start looking for pretty quick is insect species. I need to be able to see large amounts of dragonflies and butterflies going off all over the place, beetles as I'm squatting down and looking, even ants, spider webs constantly in the way on tall stems of grass. These should just be everywhere. Because I know if you're doing that, right, there's not accidental drift from pesticides. I know that we're allowing things to complete their life cycles. I know that there are predators out here eating flies that are a problem for most of our livestock, right? We've got all of these little pieces that are helping to solve bigger problems. Um, for bird species, like I said, we've got that app running in our back pocket. So when we're done, we'll be able to look at that, and Merlin will actually keep a log of every time that it has heard and what the different species of birds that it has heard while we were out there going. Um, but a lot of these birds, right, they're eating different fly and insect problems out in our fields, right? I love being out in a field and seeing scissortail flycatchers flying over my field. I love being out in an orchard and seeing kestrels and red-tailed hawks flying around, making sure I don't have as many moles and voles and gophers causing problems, right? We should be able to see these all the time as we're walking out through our field. Um, Especially like running that app during key migration times is a cool one because then you'll really start tagging up when you start getting a bunch of species and you're doing a really great job. And then finally, the last thing I would look at walking in someone's field, because everything else is going to lead up to this, is just livestock health and activity. Right? If I walk out into a field and all of them look a little bonier than they should, right? Their coat nice and shiny, then I know they're not getting enough protein or carbohydrates. I know that they're not getting the right balance of minerals that they need to from that soil. And those are easy things. Everyone can just walk out and look at and see whether or not an animal's healthy, but also what are they doing? Are they constantly milling about, struggling to find enough grass to eat? Or are they mostly laying in the shade chewing their cud during the middle of the day, right? Middle of the day, they should just be relaxing on a hot summer day in Missouri or Pennsylvania, Texas, Tennessee. They shouldn't be feeling like they have to go out and graze in the middle of the day. They should be able to just lay around and chew their cud and enjoy themselves. Pigs shouldn't be constantly pestering me for food after about 5 minutes. They're going to because they're very excited, right? Or if you were out there with your cows a bunch, they're going to come up and they should be inquisitive. But after about 5 minutes, they should realize you don't have treats and they should just wander off and leave you alone for the most part and go back to grazing or relaxing. That lets me know that they're full, right? They have had enough. They're satiated. They're getting what they need from that pasture. And then they go back to doing what they're doing.
I love that. So that idea of the cattle and the animals not bugging you for food, that's because they have a diverse diet. So say you're
Mm-hmm.
grazing on just fescue, and I don't know
Yep.
the answer to this, so I'm asking, but like, are those mono diets like they're just constantly looking for food? Is that what you see?
Yeah, they're constantly looking for food and they're constantly looking for minerals, right? And a big one of that is going to be that like they're not getting the amount of carbohydrates and they're not getting the amount of protein that they need from just a single forage species. They're definitely not getting the right amounts of salt, copper, and calcium that they need from eating single or just selected species. Um, so they're always going to be looking for something, even if they can't quite, they can't tell you what it is. If they're constantly searching out whatever they're missing, you know that they're going to behave that way, right? If my pigs are just constantly up and around me, and I say that because I that was what we settled on for a long time, right? But cows are the same way. If they're constantly all over you wanting cake out of the back of your truck, um, range cake, range cubes, right? Um, or they're constantly needing more and more feed. With our pigs, we reached a point where I had a lot of pigs out on pasture that were getting obese, right? On at 10 months on 2 pounds or so of grain a day and goat milk whey, just because we had a friend who had a dairy that needed to get rid of that. Right, they're getting obese on it. They're not gaunt, and it's on 2 pounds of grain a day. So
That's
yeah,
pretty amazing. Okay, so let's take this underground. What are the key soil health indicators producers should be paying attention to, and how can they track progress over time?
yeah. So that opens like a whole can of worms, and so we can absolutely talk more about that. But when we start looking underground versus looking at all those things on the top, you can start running a lot of tests, right? That'll be easiest. You can always, of course, just go out there with a sharpshooter shovel, dig it up, and try sniffing the soil and feeling how it feels crumbling in your hands and whatnot. But if you're really wanting a way to like track progress, um, then running a test to check for soil organic matter content, which sounds cliche and oversaid, right? Because every soil test will give you soil organic matter content. But I've been looking at soil tests for years, right? Since high school and college. And I tend to see soil tests that are drastically lower in soil organic matter content than they should just normally be, right? Like seeing a lot of tests that are in the 1% range, and that should never be the case, right? We should be looking at 3, 5, 10% soil organic matter just normally out in your field. That should just be the baseline standard of this is what's there. And we should be able to see that way deep down in the soil profile. So it may be cliche to just say tracking your soil organic matter percentage, but that is a big one. Um, Compaction with a penetrometer is a good one. If you can afford to get one of those, they're not that bad price wise. And just going through and recording what that is after soil saturation and kind of keeping a note on your phone, right, of what that was different times of the year and how that's improving year to year. As our root structure gets better under the soil, as we get more soil microbes, and we get more soil organic matter, right, that number should go much better. It should be way easier to just drive that. I've seen people take some that you can just drive that entire soil penetrometer into the ground on their side of a fence. And that's like 3, 4 feet, right? That's a big metal rod. And then step over the fence into their neighbor's field and not be able to go 3 inches in. You know, right there, you're doing a good job when you can do that. Water infiltration test using a double ring test, right? Seeing how fast is that rainwater going to flow in and how much, right? A lot of people just look at like, but they want to think, I feel like when I talk to people about the double ring penetrometer test, is how fast that water can infiltrate, right? And that is a really, really important thing when we're looking at rainfall. But also to do one, you have to get the soil to saturation. And on a nice, healthy field, it takes forever to get it to soil health, like to get it to saturation levels. And that's one of the biggest things why having healthy soil helps in flood resilience. If my field floods super quickly because that water, the soil can't hold that volume of water, that's a problem. You'll find, that standing water out in fields, if it takes your field longer to reach the standing water level because that soil can hold it like a sponge, you're going to be way better off during flood and during drought seasons.
So let's go back to soil test. They're super important. We talk about
Mhm.
them all of the
Yep.
time. Um, do you have a favorite soil test? I know we talk a lot about Haney test. We talk a lot about Kinsey's Albrecht testing.
Mhm.
They show a lot of same things and a lot of kind of different pieces. Do you have a preference? And also, how do they compare to like what you can get through the extension?
Yeah, I don't want to bash the extension, but for the most part, it's not worth the time, especially in Missouri, since now you have to pay for it, unfortunately, right? Like, you're just not gonna, you'll get your soil organic matter. And if you're only worried about that, sure, do the extension one. It's a very cheap test to do, but I am all in favor for both the Haney test and the Kinsey tests, which is the Albright method test, right? Um, both of those are going to show, like she said, a lot of the same things, but also two very different things from the standpoint of I like thinking of the Haney test when I'm wanting to track and measure soil biology and how that's doing. But with the, and of course, like the actual amount of minerals that the plants are going to functionally be able to use using the chemicals they release through their root exudates, right? That's an important aspect of this. But I also really like the balancing aspect of the Albright method and the Kinsey testing. So I really like that from that standpoint and knowing how are we shifting from year to year and what we're using, right? Plants are just and then by extension, our livestock, because we're shipping them off, but plants are just biological mining equipment, right? And I've done the numbers so many times on so many different crops at this point that it just feels crazy and mind blowing when you think about if I want, say, an apple from an orchard, or I want a cow, and I want that apple to be, have tons of calcium in it, or I want that cow to be super rich in iron for, we want iron rich meat, right? That means I'm exporting iron off my farm. And if I'm not adding that back at some point, I'm going to have iron deficient soil, right? Or in the case of that orchard, right? If I have a high density orchard and I have 1,000 trees per acre at 40 pounds of apples per tree, I'm at 40,000 pounds of apples going off. That's a lot of calcium leaving my farm. That's a lot of copper in trace amounts leaving my farm that adds up every year. And eventually they'll be deficient. So I like using the Albright Kinsey test, right, to track that and make sure that we're putting back what we're exporting off our farms, our crops, because we need to put it back. If we're taking it out, we can't just keep exporting and mining stuff off our fields and never putting it back. And that goes for our livestock fields too, because the cow is a big chunk of minerals that just walked out the farm gate, and you're not getting it back in the form of that composted cow. So we need to put it back
It is a delicious chunk of
for both
minerals.
those tests. It is
One
a
thing I
delicious
will
looking
say
meal. Yeah.
too, shameless plug, for the Farmgate Journal, we did interview Neil Kinsey and then did a follow-up interview with Tim Reinbott, both
Mhm.
talking about the Albrecht method and that soil nutrient balancing. So you can find those on MOA's YouTube, and I can send links out later so you can get an understanding of what that is. And I do know Kinsey also does a big series of what you can add, like what products you can add to get minerals back. And if you say you want to be organic, he will do that for you on Relisted.
Mhm.
Another shameless plug, we have Kinsey joining us for our conference coming up in February. So he's a great listen, and he'll be doing a pretty
Yes.
long workshop for us as well. So, and the man's in his 80s, so take advantage of seeing him when you can.
Yep.
He
Yeah, I
may
got
live
to
forever.
do that back when we were colonial, and that was, yeah, that was a 3 day workshop with him, and
Yeah,
that really shifted a lot of mindset stuff for me. That was awesome. Definitely worth it.
completely worth it. And then I do want to stop back at the water infiltration with the double nested ring. I've seen that
Mhm.
happen. And you were talking about the field needing to be saturated first to find how that works.
Mhm.
Tell me,
Yeah, so
tell me more. I guess.
so essentially I've only done them 2 or 3 times now, and they were a few years back. But essentially you have two rings, right? And you're just creating a water barrier with the one ring. You're only pounding them in a couple of inches. And the goal is to see when you've reached saturation at the end of a big rain event or a flood. These are also really common in like septic systems, like when you're testing infiltration rate to determine whether or not you can put in a septic system. So if you're like, and a lot of times specialty equipment like ag stuff can get expensive. So if you're wanting to do this, also just look up how they do it for septics. That's oftentimes you can find that like a little adjacent thing that is cheaper. Um, so you have those two rings that are driven in, and you're trying to reach saturation, same as it would at the end of a big rainfall event. And then you're trying to see, okay, well, how fast can water then move through that soil profile after we've reached saturation? So, say I've had this big rain event and I'm still getting dumped on, right? I'm reaching flood stage problems now. How fast is that then going to go through my soil profile and work its way back out and not be a horrible boggy mess out there in an area where we want to work and move? Or knowing this is going to be a horrible boggy spot for if we wanted just a pasture paddock and instead go, okay, this is a seasonal grazing spot. We know it's a wetland in spring, and we can hit it for a couple of weeks during summer when it's really dry and hot, and then move back off of it. And that helps give you kind of that idea, but also track how are we increasing the soil's ability to store that water long term and pull it in.
That's great. And so would you use that information of like knowing that area and write it into your like idea of a grazing management plan for your specific farm and know that you have to flex
Mhm.
from it based on weather?
Yeah, right. And you'll see some of that as you're just walking around. Different plants will kind of give you an idea of that spot's probably pretty boggy most of the year. But yeah, you definitely want to keep track of that. If you're running through and you're wanting to do all of these tests, then yeah, keeping track of how that spot improves over time, how that infiltration rate changes in that different area on your farm will tell you a lot of that. And yeah, keeping track of that would be helpful to then just kind of keep in your mind because when you're planning your grazing and working around a field, right, we want to make sure that I'm not grazing my livestock above where water is going to flow down into a spot and then moving to that spot next, right? I don't want water to wash all the parasites from my manure or just manure, right? Down into a spot where then I'm going to graze in another week. So then I can go, well, okay, this spot is normally boggy. So either I need to avoid it right now for while I'm grazing when it's boggy, or I should hit that first and then move above that in the watershed, right? For as far as like a fields watershed, not the whole landscape watershed. So
That helps kind of click some things in my brain. I like that explanation. All right, so you mentioned plants and that watching plants to see kind of how the soil is performing. So when you're evaluating a pasture, what plant and forage indicators tell you that your grazing management is working or the adjustments that need to be made?
So right, I'm gonna look for things like diversity, resilience, density. I want to be able to see a ton of species, right? That's this diversity aspect. I need to see tons and tons of plants out there and not just, a big stand of one or a couple of plants. I want to see as many different types of plants as possible. We talked about with that, 20 plus plant species in a tight little area. And there are sections of the prairie where they can find 100 plus species of plants in a meter by meter section, right? It's crazy the density and diversity that exists in the in our plains areas. Like it's and especially in the Midwest, it's just the same two thing. And I say Midwest and my brain always goes to Ozark Mountains, right? That's where I'm from. So I say Midwest and that's what I mean when really it's this whole thing, right? Um, but that brings us resilience from the standpoint of all of these different plants. If we have a mix of cool season and warm season and deep rooted plants and tap rooted plants and fibrous rooted plants, that provides the assurance that whether I have a flood, whether I have a drought, whether I have overgrazed a spot or undergrazed a spot or had deer elk come through and eat a bunch of it, right? I will have something there for my livestock to eat for sure. The more plants I have, the better safety I have. And then density. I don't want to see really any bare soil. It's going to happen, right? I'm not talking right in front of your gates. I'm not talking about right along the fence where you tend to walk and so the animals stand right there and yell at you before you feed them. I'm not talking about right around your water troughs. That's going to happen, and that's great. We do need some bare soil for ground nesting bees and things like that. But the goal should be that when I look down and I'm trying to look at all the different plant species in a spot, I should have to kind of like dig through a bunch of thatch. And all of these plants are working to use as much of the water in the soil and take advantage of as much of the sunlight hitting the ground as possible, right? We want to think of like a diverse forest canopy is essentially what we're creating in miniature in our soil. All of that sunlight needs to be able to be used.
Fantastic. I also think too, you mentioned deep-rooted plants versus just some of the plants like, clover's a shallow
Hmm.
root. You get those deep-rooted
Hmm.
plants and you're pulling up another level of nutrients from farther down in the
Yep.
soil, which is a great thing for that diversity for your animal's diet.
And it's
Yeah.
cycling those minerals, right? Because a lot of our minerals are water soluble, right? So if we're thinking like that calcium working its way down through our soil profile, eventually it gets past where a lot of those shallow rooted plants can access it anymore. But those deeper rooted plants, right, they're pulling it up and using it in their stems, using it in their leaves. And then my livestock is either eating it, stomping it down back onto the surface, or pooping on it, right? And so now that calcium that was pulled from 10 feet down in the soil profile is back in the top 0 to 3 inches of my soil profile. And it can then begin that process again so that I'm cycling calcium and other water soluble minerals back through that soil profile instead of just having to reapply it all of the time, right?
And I think another thing that came to mind as you're talking about plant diversity too, we talk a lot about the late summer slump here where the grasses are not pulling nutrients or
Yep.
you're right, that stop growing. And if you've got
Yep.
diversity
Yep.
there and maybe you've taught the livestock to graze on some of the weeds that you think of as noxious weeds,
Mm-hmm.
they're still
Yep.
getting variety. And maybe you're feeding less hay when your neighbors are feeding
Mm-hmm.
hay in these late summer droughts that we have.
Yep. Well, and you're also thinking if you're creating enough silvopasture out in your fields and in your, oh God, sorry, I have a cat.
Unexpected guest arrived.
Yeah, sorry. Um, if you are creating enough silvopasture and enough trees in your pasture, right, and these shrub species that you're working around, I don't know, go out this August, right, and look around at how many mulberry trees still look really, really nice when a lot of the rest of the grasses are starting to die down. And mulberries are extremely high in protein. They compare easily with alfalfa for protein content. And so if we're making sure we have tons of that available and bulking up and building up, providing shade for our cattle during some of that, but also providing a nice protein rich meal supplement right there through our fence lines. And I'm not saying like grow a bunch of trees inside your fence, right? And ruin your fence that you have to rebuild. But you can grow them next to it. You can grow them right on the other side of it. And you can just walk out there every now and then. I used to love going through and stripping leaves off for my pigs or just honestly cutting a tree down in the middle of the summer on a tree that's going to coppice back and grow back from that, like a mulberry, they're going to be fine. They will grow back. And just dropping that in there for them so that they get a little bit more protein right when they need it, when all the rest of that grass is struggling.
That's fantastic. I've ever never actually heard other producers talking about coppicing their trees down for the purpose of feeding the animals, right? We talk a lot
Mhm.
in some of our specialty crops about coppicing for the health of the plant, but to turn that around and it's for the animals, I think is
Oh, yeah.
fantastic.
I
Um,
absolutely love coppicing, and a lot of it is the use there.
yeah, yeah. Regenerative grazing has to work biologically and financially. What livestock performance indicators should producers be tracking?
That's honestly like the same ones that you would do for any conventional farm, right? We should, as regenerative grazers, be able to compete and exceed all of the exact same metrics that a conventional farm is doing, right? We are cutting expenses through the process of like reducing all of those birds, the phoretic mites that are traveling on your dung beetles, the dung beetles themselves. Those are reducing fly and parasite pressure. So now I don't need to buy fly spray. I don't need to use as much dewormer. Great. I've saved some money there, right? Um, if I am diversifying my forages, making sure that I have some woody stemmy material, if I am making sure that I have a diverse amount of proteins and sugars and carbohydrates and that roughage, right? Coming in at different times throughout the year, then no matter what nature is throwing at us at that moment, I'm not worrying about having, do I got to buy hay right now? Should I go give them some molasses? Should I give them a protein tub? No, you shouldn't have to, right? You don't need to do that if you're managing this diverse field so that you don't have to buy those inputs. Um, you should be able to track those exact same financial metrics and livestock health metrics as any conventional farm and have less expenses to show for that.
So animals still healthy, animals putting on weight, sell for a
Mm-hmm.
great price. I
Still
think some,
profitable at the end of the year.
right, still
Yep.
profitable at the end of the year. I think something we talk a lot about in our organization is right markets, whether that is at the sale barn or
Mm-hmm.
you're direct to customer. And if you are regenerative and you're selling direct to customer, that's a really great opportunity to increase price margin as well.
Yes, it is.
So, okay,
And
so
you
let's
have less expenses.
absolutely. So let's
So charging
say
more or less expenses.
that's beautiful. That's great for the pocketbook. So, and I think another piece of the conversation too that we're having in the climate that we are in with input prices currently, soil fertility
Mm-hmm.
is a
Yeah.
huge topic right now. And
Yep.
so, you know, anytime we can lessen in the number of times we put inputs on, not to say we never do, maybe we have to add minerals back in,
No, they still have to happen. Yep.
but lessen the cost of that fertility. Okay, so let's say a
Yeah.
farmer starts
And I do want to
tracking.
clarify
Go ahead.
one thing real quick. I know that that has a super negative connotation to say like, oh yeah, we are more profitable. We're lowering our expenses and raising price points and things like that. But in today's day and age, one thing we really have to think about as more and more farmers are leaving, we lose thousands and thousands of small farms that are just getting converted to larger farms every year. The ability for a small farm to actually be able to pay the mortgage, pay their bills, and pay themselves a living wage makes it where it's more attractive and functional for more young farmers to get into farming, right? Why would I go into something that I'm going to make minimum wage on when all of my friends are getting tech jobs and making 100, $200,000 a year, right? So I know people get frustrated about the idea of farms actually making a profitable income, but they need to. Your farm needs to make enough money where it's not just I do this because I love the lifestyle of it. That's great, and we need to do that, but we do also need to be profitable so that we can keep doing this.
Right.
So sorry, a little
It
tangent
can
there,
be
but
and is a super rewarding job, emotionally and because you love it.
yep.
But it's not if you're broke and you can't pay the bills. So making a
Mhm.
profit is key. So let's say that a farmer starts tracking all of these indicators that we've talked about and they aren't seeing improvement. So those indicators in soil health, diversity, livestock health. How do they diagnose the problem? Is this grazing management, stocking rate, environment, timing, etc.?
really, so the issue could be any of those things at any given time for any of them. Usually it's just a bunch of little things all compounding in that framework, right, to become the problem. Um, and I feel like solving that problem when I talk to people, they treat it more like a Gordian knot, right? Where they just want to go out there and just cut the problem in half, right? So then you just have a bunch of these little fragments, and that's what we're doing when we're going out there with sides, right? Any of the herbicides, pesticides, whatever. And you're just going, I have a problem with, this. My cattle aren't putting on enough weight. They're not showing this. So I'm just going to spray for flies. That'll solve the problem. And then it kills a bunch of other things. And that, when I think it's easier to think of it as like a Gordian knot of Christmas lights. We go out there and we just start cutting it out. Well, now none of my lights work. And if I go trying to string them back together, it's not going to quite work. We can't just go through and hack our problem to these little pieces. We have to pick apart at it and work and go, okay, why is that problem actually happening? What is the root cause? What is the not just the symptoms of the problem, like they're not putting on weight, but what could actually be leading to that problem and solve that problem. Um, so like if I'm thinking, am I deworming at a time of year that is negatively impacting dung beetle reproduction? Right? Can I shift my deworming to winter when dungs aren't out there doing their thing? Right? And enough time that then, say, ivermectin or whatever you're using has enough time to actually break down in the soil before dung beetles start doing their thing? Um, am I grazing the same paddock at the same time every year in my rotation so that that same plant that would be flowering at that same time is the one that is constantly being hammered, and so that paddock has less diversity than it could if I were to change up when that paddock is grazed at different times of the year, right? um, if I'm running the same species consistently, right? Cattle graze differently than sheep do. Sheep graze differently than pigs do, and so on and so forth, right? You've got different weight amounts. Chickens behave drastically different to your soil profile than cattle do. So if I'm running only one species or the same species, I'm going to wind up with a lot of problems that really would be resolved if I just changed that up a little bit and added in some more complexity. So yeah, it's just getting down to what is the actual problem and not just the symptoms of your problem.
I love that. Something that you said in there that grazing the same paddock at the same time of year with the same animal every year
Mhm.
lessens diversity. And I have come across recently somebody who's a really enjoyable follow for me on social media. It's Wes White. His handle is Tick Creek Ranch, and he has a
Oh, I love his, yeah,
method called mosaic
yeah.
grazing. So he's actually skipping over entire strips.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's similar to rotational grazing, but he's actually skipping over entire strips for a year. So that strip may have a
Mhm.
full year plus to have the full plant life cycle. And then the next year he'll go back and
Mhm.
everywhere he grazed then becomes a strip where
Yeah.
it has a full year plus rest. And I think that's a beautiful opportunity. And the other thing it's doing is making these highways, which we talk about a lot
Mhm.
in the urban climate, right? These insect highways, but doing it in the fields too, where you've got this space that's really beneficial for pollinators, for dragonflies, etc., because you're letting everything flower out.
Yeah, I love his talk, like specifically on that in regards to dragonflies helping to solve his fly problem. Somebody was noticing that, like, when he was just following it right through and only had the one border of ungrazed, the dragonflies had a much less, they had much less area to access the flies on the cows, whereas when they had a tall strip on both sides and maybe trees to one side, dragonflies had a massive amount of access right to those flies on his cows. And that was just, yeah, loved it. It was awesome.
Right. And it's one of those things that, EQIP is doing some great work on getting field borders put in and
Mhm.
NRCS has all of those options for conservation, but utilizing those in different kind of how we manage our things instead of letting it be a field border, it's right in the middle of the field. And it's, just
Yeah.
taking time to look at how the system is or is not working for you in that moment and adjusting.
Yep.
Beautiful. Let's carry on. So what are some of the most common mistakes you see producers make when they are trying to improve their grazing systems?
Um, this kind of falls on the last there. It's oversimplification, right? We just nature is complex, and that's what we're trying to do out in a field. When I was in college, I heard someone say for the first time, uh, when you're a cattle farmer, you're not a cattle farmer, you're actually a grass farmer, right? And when I was in college, that seemed like this great, like, oh yeah, they're totally right. That's what I should be focusing on is growing great grass. And then the longer I did this and the more different systems I worked with and the more different ecological types I worked with, right? Where we're grazing, I've managed several different farms in several different areas. And so I've gotten to see all of these different areas where we're grazing, right? And noticing that this is really complex. If I get stuck in this very simple thing and I'm just trying to grow grass, right? And that's a great first mindset shift. Then I'm going to miss a lot of the other things that I really need to attempt to balance here to make all of the rest of this be good. So what I tend to think of now is that good agriculture is conservation and vice versa, right? Good conservation is good agriculture. And that's a whole other thing that you can really dump into. But when we just think about if I'm trying to conserve things and functionally work through this, I'm going to solve a lot of problems. When I was managing Bison Ranch right out of college, we did an equip grant to try to put in warm season grasses because we were suffering a lot of droughts in southern Missouri, and which meant a lot of our cool season grasses, like our fescue and everything, right, was starting to wane off for several months of the year. And we thought, well, if we put in warm season grasses, that'll help solve some of that problem. But if we had already had this mindset of conservation in what we're doing, and we were trying to create habitat for bobwhite quail, right, from that outset, we would have already had some warm season grasses established and functioning within our paddocks and systems that when those dry seasons hit, those warm season grasses could have expanded to fill that niche. And instead, we were taking a bunch of Roundup to try to clear out, which was the practice. You round up out, we were doing 30 plus acres, and then attempt to drill in warm season grass and get them to establish before dry season hit for a long term growth. And honestly, it didn't work that great. We came out and we had really bad stand infiltration. But if that had been just part of our practices from the outset of going, it'd be great to see some bobwhite quail out here while we're doing this, or using those bobwhite quail as an indicator, we would have already had warm season grasses that were allowing us to have that season extension for our grazing. So don't oversimplify this thing.
I love that. Um, okay, so for someone who is listening to this and says that all sounds great, but I'm overwhelmed, where do I start? I mean, you just said don't oversimplify this thing, but like it's a lot.
Yeah,
We're
I know,
looking
no,
at
I
a
just said,
lot. We're
like
listening for
make it
birds. We're looking at
complex.
dung beetles.
Yep,
I'm
yep,
counting the number
yeah.
of different plants for my forage. What are the first things you recommend by measuring and observing?
Yeah, and I do acknowledge that, right? I did just say you should make it really, really complex while you're out there in your field, and that is hard. But right, I feel like we as farmers have the ability to be very smart people. We're out there working, we're very intuitive. Um, it's complex in the same way that if you were to drop someone into another job, they'd have a lot of things to try to learn to get up there. A lot of these things that I'm talking about are things that most of us as farmers should just intuitively know and kind of just expand on our knowledge. We're not having to start from scratch most of the time. Um, so doing all of these little checks, right, and things that we're looking at, just do them while you're already doing something else. You're already going out there to check on your livestock. You're already going out there to refill waterers or check that your water is still working. So you're already out there in the field. It's not that big of a deal for you to pause every now and then. One, just when you're going out to do that, throw Merlin on your phone, right? Like I said before, I'm just going to click that on when I'm walking around in my field. That just becomes a fun little thing, right? And we used to just talk about it. We get in during the day, and that'd be a fun evening conversation to be like, "Oh, check out what I heard in the field or what Merlin picked up. Like this is so neat." Right? That's just something that just runs in your back pocket, and becomes something that I wind up. The more I meet people doing this, the more they wind up becoming birders as they get older because they wind up finding all of these cool birds out in their fields that you know they had never even realized were out there, and they're there, and creating more habitat in their fields to work around those. When you're out there looking at your cows and already checking their body condition, right? And any good farmer is going to go out there and see how their cows are doing. Pause and just dig through and look at the plants around you while you're doing that, right? And you don't have to know how to identify all of these different plants. Plants look different, right? That's the easy part about this. They all look very different for the most part. It's not hard for you to just grab leaves from individual ones. That's all I do because I can't remember. Did I count red clover yet? I don't know. I'm on plant 15, right? I don't do that. I stand and I grab a leaf from each of these plants as I'm going. So I wind up with just a fistful of different grasses and forbs in my hand. And I go, okay, yeah, 20, right? That's easy enough to do while you're just wandering around, and you can throw them in your back pocket or feed them to a cow while you're standing there. Um, so easy little things like that you can do um, when you're already looking to make sure that your cattle's dung pats are looking the right consistency for making sure they're getting enough protein and roughage. Break a few of them open. I usually just take a Sharpie in my pocket and just start digging through and poking through while I'm doing that. And one, that's going to help you tell whether or not they have the right moisture content in their dung. Are they getting enough water? But also, now you're going to be able to find some dung beetles and you're going to be able to check that. And so it's just these doing these little steps during things you should already be doing just normally in the process of being a farmer, right?
That makes sense. And it also sounds to me like a lot of those things are really fun if you've got kids. So I know a lot of farmers have small
Yeah,
hands
yep,
helping, right? Like that sounds like a really great project for a
yep,
kid to do. Go count the plants.
yeah.
Go collect the plants for me,
Yeah, tell them to bring you as big of a bouquet of different plants that they can find. Like I want all
right?
different plants. Bring me as
Every
big of a
plant has
bouquet
to
as
be
you can,
different.
right?
And,
Yep.
have
Yep.
them break open the cow pies and the manure pads.
Yep. Give them a little jar or a bottle while you're out riding around and have them fill it up with as many different ones as they can grab, right?
Right. It's beautiful. Or, I even think about when I was at on an ecdysis field day, we had bug catching nets and we stood in a
Yep.
square meter
Yep.
and we caught bugs. How many did I catch? What does that look like? And then just release them. So,
Yep.
um, so skepticism around regenerative agriculture. I hear it both from conventional folks and then I hear it from the other end of the very hard and rigid organic folks for different reasons, right?
Hmm.
Conventional folks, they're saying, this is the way we've always done it. This is an easy thing for me to do to go spray whatever side it is, whether it's an herbicide, pesticide. And then from
Yep.
the organic side, when I hear the argument there, it's a yes, that works, but there are no standards. And we recognize that. Organic has
Mhm.
a government-backed standard, yet that standard is still very open to interpretation from each individual
Mhm.
certifier. And there are lots of people, or a handful of people, rather, kind of coming up with certifications around regenerative agriculture. And so,
Mhm.
uh, standards aside, how do you know what works? And what are your answers to these people in measurable ways? How do you confront that argument of how do I know it works or the
Yeah.
skepticism?
So there are, like we've talked about a bunch, there are tons of different measurable tests. If you want to go out there with a penetrometer, you can test your field and a neighbor's field, whether they're organic or conventional, right? You can go out there, you can take Albright or Haney tests, right? These all give you measurable things that you can check to see whether or not you're doing a good job. Um, but for me, like, if my goal is to exist within an ecosystem and contribute to that ecosystem that is my farm, I love to hunt and fish, right? So, and most farmers I know feel the same way. Um, so go out and quail hunt this year. Can you quail hunt on your farm? Because you should be able to. And if you can't go out and quail hunt, if you can't go out gigging for bullfrogs in your cattle ponds, if you can't go out and hunt ducks and other waterfowl, right? And limit out easily. If you have a creek running through your property, you can't go fish for trout out of your creek, you've got a problem, right? Those should just be able to exist because they have always existed, right? We hear stories our grandparents tell us about, how many ducks they used to be able to shoot or how they used to be able to go out there and catch quail with their hands flying through the field. We can't do that anymore, right? And so you're being successful if you can go out there and you can hunt, and that game that is existing in your system is also thriving. You're doing good if that's what you're able to go out there and just enjoy throughout the season.
I think that's a great measurement is like the ecology is there. And then, of course, there are all
Hmm.
the tests and there are the financial
Hmm.
markers as well. It's not just top line revenue, it's overall profit of inputs
Hmm.
versus um,
Yeah.
revenue. So
It feels kind of greedy, but you should be able to do all of that. You should be able to be profitable. You should be able to produce a ton of food, and you should have a healthy ecosystem on your farm. Like I want to do all three, right? And have some time to do other things I enjoy, like be able to go out there and hunt or fish or camp and spend time with kids, right? Like you should be able to do all of that, as hard as that sounds. That's the far off goal that we're aiming for, right? We aim small, miss small. I'm aiming for that. Like that's a big
that
goal,
sounds
but
like a really big
that's the target.
utopia life, and I like it. I
Yeah,
think we
right.
should be aiming for it.
No.
So I know before I get to my last kind of plant question, we talked about tests. Do you ever do bricks tests when you're out in fields to look at sugar content? If so, have you ever worked with spraying molasses, etc.?
Mhm. I haven't. I would love to. They're just a little pricey. So I've never bought one. Um, I do eat, and it's one thing that like I run into more often than I feel like I should, because it just feels normal to me. But I eat a lot of things when I'm wandering around. And so, I'll grab leaves and I'll even, chew on grass as you're walking around, or I'll grab a weed and chew on it. And right, bricks, we're just measuring for sugar content. And you can see it in your livestock. Actually, Tick Creek actually has a great video where he winds up going out and spraying molasses to kind of resolve some of those problems during late summer season with the forage diversity. So, well, I don't test for bricks specifically because bricks testers are kind of expensive. No more expensive than like a penetrometer or anything like that. It's just one more thing. Um, I think it's a useful tool, but you can also just go out there and eat stuff in your fields too. So, and see how sweet that grass tastes this year versus last year or last week. So,
Perfect. And then another grazing measure, when we have snow events or other events where we are feeding,
mhm.
have you seen big benefits from bale grazing, rolling out the
Mhm.
bales, moving them, and tell us about
Yep.
that?
Yeah. I really like rolling out bales versus there have been several times through various reasons that I've had to just set a round bale down in a field, right? And when I'll do it, I would like set them in a round bale in each paddock and then, up those round bales as needed, but like set a round bale in a paddock and then just graze it and then move them on. And they may not have eaten the whole bale and we'll just keep coming back to it. But I really don't like doing that because then there's always this kind of just dead spot that seems to take forever to really grow back because there's too much fertility there. There's too much salt there, just from manure and everything concentrated in one spot. And it's over mulched. So I really do like the rolling out bales when possible. If you have enough cows or enough livestock that they can get through a round bale in a setting, great. That's not a problem anymore because you're going to work through that. My problem has tended to be having just few enough that they'll eat like a third or a half of that bale in the couple of days they're in a paddock, and then we move on. We've got to keep coming back to it so they keep hitting that spot. So yeah, I do really like in the middle of winter in a lot of our context in the Midwest and the North, right, where it is snowy, it is icy. There is not grass there right now, right? And they're gonna dig through some stuff and get to some of it. And if you've got some taller forages poking through like you should, they're gonna eat down on some of that. But bale grazing is going to have to happen, and rolling out bales really helps spread that impact out. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a huge impact. I've seen it, my dad is lucky enough to have enough cows that he can put out 4 or 5 bales, and within 2 days they're all eaten through. He doesn't necessarily move his cattle, especially during the winter, but he will put his bales in a different spot. And so you don't end up necessarily with those dead spots, or maybe a couple of
Mhm.
dead spots. And but the number of bales he's putting out, you may get 2 dead spots the next spring just because, oh, the
Mhm.
snow melted and now they're
Yep.
grazing again, right?
Yeah. And you
Um,
do still have, if you're not like, you should rotate your livestock even through winter. Like treat it
oh,
like you're still grazing because, and I know you know that, but that's right.
yes,
When
yes.
we're leaving them in one spot and doing that, they still have their favorite shade trees to get away from sleet. And so they're still under that one tree, but if we're moving, they will have to pick a different tree. And so less concentrated manure around those spots. So yeah,
That's
still rotate even in winter.
that's a great point. Less compaction. Okay, if you could leave
Mhm.
farmers with one mindset shift about grazing management, what would it be?
I will probably always go back to that good agriculture is conservation and vice versa mindset. Um, if you, when you're grazing, are constantly thinking about, I am trying to create wildlife habitat and thinking about all the different little pieces of wildlife that exist in my field as part of what I'm doing and using your livestock as a tool to create more wildlife habitat, it is going to end up drastically positively affecting that livestock operation. That needs to be the mindset is that my livestock is a tool to improve the conservation efforts on my farm. And that process, the end result is going to be better livestock production. Those cows are going to be healthier. Your soil is going to have better water holding and retention abilities. There's going to be less runoff. You're going to use less fertilizers. You're going to use less sides. Aiming for good conservation through your livestock is what is going to make your livestock better.
I think that's great. That takes my last question. And so now we're going to open it up. Anybody who wants to unmute. But before that happens, Kristen did drop into the comment section about another IPP farmer, Idaho pasture pig farmer, that took all old round bales from any farmers that wanted to part with them and rolled them
Mm-hmm.
out in their
Yep.
pastures. You should see his pastures, she says.
Yeah.
I'd love
That's a
to.
lot of extra organic matter dumped out in the field. And I talked about earlier about our plants are just biological mining equipment. Their job is pulling up all those different minerals and using sunlight to convert those into a usable form. When you are taking hay from somebody else's farm, and I'm not saying get hay, I'm just saying you are also taking minerals from their farm and from their operation and rolling it out in your field. So your plants are drastically rewarded by not only increasing the soil organic matter from all of that that gets dropped and mixed into the field, but you're also getting all of the minerals imported from their field too. So
Loss for
yeah,
them,
there's a
win for
big part of
you.
that that is just minerals. Yeah, yep.
All right. Does anybody have questions or anything they'd like to add or offer? Feel free to unmute yourself, or if you prefer to drop something in the chat, please do. Right. I'm not seeing anybody unmute. So it looks like you have thoroughly explained everything. Good job.
That's what I'm going to assume, right?
Caleb, thank you so much. This has been amazing. And this has
Thanks for
been
having me.
another episode of the Farmgate Journal. So thank you all so much.